In this lesson, we'll be continuing with the Polygon Modeling Toolkit, and we're going to move down to the Mesh Tools component part of the components toolbox here. So there's a few different kinds of tools in here, and I'm going to show you what each one of these ones does. I think I'll start from some of the simpler to some of the more difficult ones. So what I've done is I have, let me get to Layers Toolbox, or Layers tab, and I've created a couple objects here. Okay, get back to the Modeling Toolkit. All right, so the first thing here is I'm going to show you how to combine objects. We've gone over grouping objects, so you could put two objects into a group, like we could put these two into a group. So you see that's cube 2 and cube 3. So we could go up to edit and we could go to group, right? So now they'll function as a single object, but you'll see, we'll pop this open, they are not a single object. There are two separate objects, okay? So I'm not going to do that. We're going to do something different for this one. Okay, so now they're separate objects again. All right, let me get into pick mode. All right, so if you want to combine two objects, you would pick one, shift select the other one, and then you would go over to this tool, combine. Okay, now if you notice here in the outliner, it is considered one object. They're not fused, but it will function as a single object. So when I go to move, it's going to move as one single unit. Now, sometimes you're going to want to have objects that are fused as an object, and you're going to want to, you're going to have to do certain operations to them. It might be exporting out the file to the 3D printer, or you may want them just to function as one unit. And especially too, if you're doing certain operations where you're actually like sewing the different like vertices together, in general, you're going to have to do a combine before you do anything like that. And we'll get into a lesson of more detailed polygonal modeling later on, where we actually, we'll go through how you put two totally different objects together. But the first step is always going to be combine. So, but sometimes though, you may not want, you might have done something and you realize you don't want that. So if you want to, it's pretty simple. You just go to separate, then they separate back out into two different objects again. The only thing is you'll have to do is it leaves them out grouped. So, you'll have to, your group, all the stuff here gets a little, you have to do a little house cleaning here. Like this is now no longer an object. So just make sure when you do that kind of stuff, just to keep looking at the different little hierarchies that are going on here. And then if you want to, there's another thing you can also do is you can also pick on objects, and you can go to this thing called edit, delete by type, history. We've gone over that a little bit, but what happens is when Maya is modeling, it keeps a history of everything you've done. And that's very useful when you want to undo things, but sometimes in the future, when you're working on rare detailed models, you will delete the history, because the history sometimes will actually make your computer file get quite large. Okay, so I just deleted it. All right, so now that's deleted. And actually, I'm just going to switch them off because I don't need these anymore. So I'll go over here, switch off that load. They're not on that layer anymore because they're a new object. Okay. All right, so the next thing is, let's get back to our Polygon toolbox, or modeling toolkit. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over smoothing. So smoothing is a way to give, well, it does a few things. It can give more subdivisions to an object, but it will smooth it out. Because basically when you start in Maya, one of the methodologies for modeling is to give subdivisions to an object. And you might have a cubed object like this, or you might be just modeling on single points, but eventually you're going to fuse it all together and you want it to kind of smooth over. So let me show you what happens here. So you have to pick the object, and then we're going to go to, put it on pick mode. I'm going to go to smooth. Okay, so now you see it's changed the object. It's given it more faces, and you can give it divisions. You can choose how many divisions you want in here. So if I give it 1, it looks like this, kind of like a pointy soccer ball. If I give it 2, it's default. it's now finally, it's got its smoothness. And if I give it a like 3, goes up. And then if you want really very smooth objects or objects with a lot of faces, then you give it much higher divisions, like 4. And some of this will come into play a lot more when we start doing a lot of digital sculpting and things like that. Because I showed you before what happens when we pick. Let's pick a point here. I'm going to put on soft select, and it's defaulted to a large number. So I'm going to give it a smaller number. Let me give it so if you remember, there's a B. If you go with the B key, the B key will let you change the size of your selection there. So now if I go to do this, if I go to move it, you'll see what this looks like. So now you see that's where this becomes useful, where you get these subdivisions become very useful. You want to sculpt an object. Okay. This completely, when we start doing the Maya sculpting tools, and if we start doing models in other programs such as Mudbox, all this subdivision stuff will become very, very important. Okay. All right. So we'll get out of this. Go back to the original cube we had. There we go. Now we're back to the original one. Okay. I'll turn this off here. Now the one last thing I'm going to do is let's go over here to our layer editor, switch on our sphere here. Okay, the sphere's a little large, so I'm going to scale it down. Let me pick on it. Here we go. Okay, now it's there. We'll move it over a little bit. You'll see what I'm going to do in a second. All right. I'm just going to get in a good position so you'll be able to see what we're going to do next. The next thing is we're going to do something called a Boolean. And a Boolean basically merges 2 objects or cuts objects. So that's this last button here, Boolean. Boolean is, those are some really important, powerful tools, and they're, Boolean is a mathematical term. And what it does is it'll basically fuse or cut objects by using different objects. So let me pick on this, pick on the cube, pick on the sphere. So now we'll go to Boolean, and it gives us a little dialog box here. So the operation is union, and press enter. Okay. So now it doesn't look like anything's happened, but if I type in 4, now you'll see in wireframe, you'll see what's happened there. So it cut out what was in there. Okay. So now if I go to Control Z, so now it's back. So now if I go to Boolean again, but in here, if you go in here, if you click in this box, it'll give you different options here. So we go to difference. So now if you see, okay, so now what it did was it cut that sphere out of the cube. Okay, so if I go Control Z, and if we go to intersection, then what it does is it just leaves what was intersected there. Okay, so let me go back a step, and I'm going to do a Boolean. Let's do a difference. I'm going to show you a couple things that you have to watch out for with Booleans. Booleans seem in some ways better than they are. Now, there's a problem. I've gone over this before a little bit, but if you notice Maya, in Maya and most 3D modeling, you want to keep to what they call quads or quadrilaterals. Quads are 4-sided objects. The reason for that is because a 4-sided object can subdivide, and it can subdivide just infinitely in a grid pattern. 3D computer programs also use triangles, Try and stay away from triangles if you can, because they don't subdivide, and then you can get into problems when you're upresing a mesh or you're texture mapping. So the rule of thumb and the recommendation is always to try and go with quads if you can. You can use different kinds of polygons like triangles if you have to, and they will work. But then there's another thing called an n-gon, which just means a polygon with n sides. It's any number sides. Now the problem here is, if you notice, like these are definitely quads. This is made up of all these. There's this original point, this point, this point, this point, and then this point, and every point along this little thing here. And none of these, they don't have a end polygon at any of these other points. Like, to make these into a quad, you'd have to break these up, and that becomes a bit of a complex operation. Now, I have some methodologies. Maya doesn't deal with that very well, but I do have some methodologies that I will show you in some of the advanced tools and some strategies to get around that, so you can use this tool, but you have to be careful with it and try not to use it if you know you're going to animate something. It's a kind of it can be a tricky tool to use properly. For modeling, it's okay, especially for 3D printing. There are ways to make the models work correctly. Okay, so that's just a caveat there. Let me undo this, get this back to our nice little cube. Okay, switch off our sphere, and there we are. We're back to our handy dandy cube. All right, so get back to the modeling toolkit. Now, the next lesson, we'll go over components, and then we'll go over some of the tools. All right, that's it for this lesson here. On to the next one.